How's it going, everybody? It's Yong here, and welcome to day 34 of the Final Fantasy XV Countdown Retrospective. Before you proceed, I highly recommend you check out day 35, in which I discuss the unveiling of Square Enix's next-generation game engine, the Luminous game engine, first shown at E3 2012. In this video, I'll be discussing the rumor from late 2012 that Versus 13 had been cancelled. Following the announcement of the Luminous engine on June 5th, 2012, a month and a half later on July 20th, 2012, out of the blue, Kotaku released this article reporting that they had learned from their sources that Versus 13 was no more. Keep in mind that at the time, people had waited for 6 years with still no end in sight for the highly anticipated title, so back then, most people weren't even surprised to read this headline. So after straight up saying that Versus 13 had been cancelled, Kotaku's article went into further detail in this next paragraph, stating the following about what they learned. One source tells Kotaku that Final Fantasy Versus 13 was officially cancelled within the last few weeks. The decision impacted morale at Square Enix, and staff were reportedly saddened by the move. Square Enix, the source added, has also decided to let Final Fantasy Versus 13 die quietly on the vine and fade away instead of officially announcing its cancellation. This would likely be due to the fact that a public acknowledgement of Versus cancellation could impact things like Square Enix's stock prices. Then, after talking a bit about comments that director Tetsuya Nomura made throughout the last few months asking for our patience, Kotaku cited the following. Another source tells Kotaku that a few months back, Final Fantasy Versus 13's development and resources had been folded into another game, which is to be the next numeric Final Fantasy title, Final Fantasy XV. Whether this meant actual game assets and code or simply the movement of staff was unclear. This information was independently corroborated by yet another source, though it's important to note both had learned of the folding prior to the more recent news of its outright cancellation. This is where things get interesting. While we know Versus 13 wasn't outright cancelled, the game did indeed end up being folded into the next numeric Final Fantasy, becoming 15. So it looks like it was around this time that Square Enix made the decision behind the scenes to make the transition. So while Kotaku's article headline was, for the most part, untrue, to their credit, they did manage to predict exactly what would happen in the future in this excerpt. Kotaku then followed up with, whether it's been cancelled entirely or had resources absorbed into a newer, larger project, the game we once knew as Final Fantasy Versus 13 would seem to be no more. Even if Final Fantasy Versus 13 has been cancelled, I'm inclined to believe that whatever Versus was, or whatever had been created for the game, will turn up in some form in Final Fantasy 15. Surely Square Enix would not cancel a game and completely dump all the work it's done, right? Yep, they nailed it in the head. The game did in fact transform and transition into what we would eventually come to know as 15. But it's important to keep in mind that while there were certainly drastic changes made to story, characters, visuals, and gameplay, at its core, 15 is still the same game. So stating that the game had been straight up cancelled was a complete exaggeration. The article continued with the following. When Kotaku contacted Square Enix about whether or not Final Fantasy Versus 13 was still in development, the game maker released the following statement. We have no confirmation on the status of Final Fantasy Versus 13, but we'll be sure to update you as it becomes available. Keep in mind, I wasn't asking for an update per se, I simply asked if Square Enix was still making a game it had already announced 6 years ago. Square Enix did not reply to Kotaku's requests for clarification regarding whether Versus was still in development or not. Then the article talked a bit about how there is an upcoming Final Fantasy event in Tokyo taking place in late August and September, noting how, while one of the stage events has been confirmed to center around a new Final Fantasy XIII project and the Lightning Saga, which we know today to be Lightning Returns Final Fantasy XIII, none of the stage events were announced to center around Versus 13. The article finally concluded by speculating that if the game doesn't make an appearance during the upcoming Final Fantasy Celebration event or Tokyo Game Show 2012, we can assume that the game is as good as dead. And then below that, you will see a little excerpt that was added in 2013 stating that this rumor was proven true. Final Fantasy Versus 13 became Final Fantasy 15. But again, Kotaku was erroneously confident in declaring that the project was outright cancelled, which definitely wasn't the case. In fact, only 4 days later, on July 24th, 2012, Square Enix CEO Yoichi Wada tweeted the following after getting wind of the rumors. While the tweet was in Japanese, Kotaku provided a translation in a new article they wrote that very same day. They first started out by acknowledging that their latest rumor was wrong, and then translated Yoichi Wada's tweet as follows. There is someone making a false rumor that Versus was cancelled. Haha. Just a minute ago, the regular Versus meeting ended. If you saw the presentation of the city, it'd knock you off your feet, lol. And just like that, people were back on board of the waning hype train, for better or for worse. It's definitely interesting to look back at Kotaku's rumor and Yoichi Wada's statement, as the final results would end up being a combination of the two. While Versus 13 wasn't cancelled, the game in its current form did cease to exist to become 15, and to Kotaku's credit, they did predict that this is exactly what might happen in one of their paragraphs, and Kotaku sources stating that the game was folding into the next numbered series were completely right, while those stating that the game had been outright cancelled blew this shift in development way out of proportion. We can also deduce looking back at this article that it was around June or July 2012 that Square Enix made the decision internally to rename the game to 15 to move the project over to their new Luminous engine, to rework some of the game's story and characters, and to shift staff around, including the director Tetsuya Nomura, who was replaced with the current director Hajime Tabata. While I'm sure such a large-scale process didn't happen overnight, it definitely sounds like it was around mid-2012 that this process at least began. So throughout July 2012, we got our biggest hint yet that Versus 13 was headed towards a major shift in development to become Final Fantasy XV. With that, I would like to conclude today's episode of the Final Fantasy XV Countdown Retrospective. Thank you for tuning in. Let us know in the comments below what your train of thought was at the time when Kotaku released this article, and to be further updated on all things Final Fantasy, stay tuned right here on Young Yeah! I'll see you guys next time. Young out!